Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant, and today I want to talk about how space games can try to avoid being boring. And I'm not talking about gameplay mechanics here as such, but rather the Achilles heel of all space games, which of course is travel time. Now, travel time is an issue with space games for one very simple reason: space is big. So as games developers, how do you represent that sheer vastness? Well, there's a number of ways to do it, but one very often used method is to represent size via time. That is to say, if it takes a long time to get anywhere, players will generally consider space to be huge. But long travel times, conversely, have the potential problem of making the game very, very dull. Right now then, there are a whole load of space games out there. The obvious ones are Star Citizen, No Man's Sky, EVE Online, and Elite Dangerous. The X series are also great examples, as are indie games like the recent Outer Wilds. Some of these have significant travel times along with the associated problems, whilst other games avoid the issue altogether. The Outer Wilds is one of the few games which essentially sidesteps the problem. It keeps its space small. Planets are undersized and in close proximity to each other. The focus here, of course, is not on realism, but rather gameplay. Therefore, everything within the game world is designed to optimize the focus of the game. It works extremely well and means travel times never get in the way of the game. On the other extreme is Elite Dangerous, with its truly massive galaxy, 400 billion star systems and trillions of planets. Travel times here can be measured in seconds, minutes, hours, or even weeks, depending on your chosen destination. And yes, those are real-world timescales. The reason that travel times are so significant within the Elite Galaxy is very simple. The focus on the game is to simulate a living, breathing galaxy, and galaxies tend to be large. Distances in Elite can be measured in tens of thousands of light years, so this means ships need to be capable of traveling extremely fast. The speed of light, for example, is far too slow for gameplay purposes. Therefore, Elite has two long-distance modes of travel: hyperspace and a supercruise. Hyperspace allows players to jump between star systems, covering tens of light years in a matter of seconds. However, these jump distances are limited, and if a player wants to plot a course of 1,000 or even 10,000 light years, then that journey will have to be undertaken in multiple jumps. Often, the longest trips can be measured in thousands of jumps. Meanwhile, travelling within star systems of Elite is done via supercruise. Speeds here are measured in c, or factors of light speed. The maximum supercruise speed is 2001 times the speed of light. Now, whilst this of course is very fast, the game also factors in acceleration and deceleration, and these can add significantly to travel times. Essentially, what this means is that travelling to a destination within a star system can take anywhere from a few seconds to well over 1 hour, depending on the location. Long travel times then lend themselves to conveying the huge scale of space. However, they also lend themselves to a whole lot of downtime, those moments where players have nothing to do in the game other than travel. It's a very different approach to that used by the Outer Worlds, for example. No Man's Sky and the X series place themselves somewhere in the middle of all this. Scales and distances are generally smaller, far lower than in real life in fact. However, they are also much larger than the Outer Wilds. This means that space tends to feel large with great distances. However, travel times are generally measured in single-digit minutes, and this keeps the fun up and maintains interest in the expense of realism. But the thing is, travel time isn't the only way to convey scale. There is another way to do this with space games, and it's often overlooked. This other concept is the idea of numbers. Space Engine is a good example to use here. Top speeds in Space Engine are around 320 million light years per second, and that is very fast. It means you can literally travel across the universe from galaxy to galaxy in mere moments. However, these supreme speeds do not make the universe feel small, far from it in fact. Instead, they actually make it feel large. With hundreds of billions of galaxies and trillions upon trillions of star systems, it literally doesn't matter how fast you travel. Space will always feel mind-bogglingly huge. So really, Space Engine removes travel time as a factor, thereby allowing you to focus on the planets, stars, nebula, galaxies and everything else. In short, it allows you to do what you actually picked Space Engine up for, which is to explore. Now this is a lesson that could well be learned by other games. Again, returning to Elite Dangerous with its 400 billion star system to explore, it really doesn't matter if you could travel at 325 million light years per second. Removing the artificial time sinks placed on travel allows the player to focus on gameplay. Exploration would still remain fun and interesting, as it would still take significant time to explore 400 billion star systems and trillions of worlds. Yet, travel time is a hurdle many people cannot get past. It's the barrier by which they measure longevity, objectivity and achievement. Personally, I feel the sheer volume of number and size outweighs time on every occasion. Now Star Citizen also falls into this same trap. While Star Citizen only currently has a single star system, travel times are also problematic. In the end, to get to grips with the idea of travel times in games as an overall concept, I decided to conduct a test and compare 3 popular space games. To do this, I needed to focus on more of the simulation side of games, at least in terms of size and scale. So the 3 games that come to mind here are Elite Dangerous, Star Citizen and EVE Online. All 3 have significant travel times, but how do these compare? So to measure the travel times across the 3 games, I had to determine a suitable measurement. Now this is where it could have been potentially problematic, with space being quite so large as it actually is, and all 3 of these games having large game worlds which are actually measured in millions of kilometers at the very least. However, whilst all 3 games are large, they are not equal. Therefore, I had to choose a unit of measurement that would actually fit into all 3 games. Star Citizen has the smallest distances of scale by far, therefore Star Citizen had to be the unit of measurement. If I had chosen either a location in Elite or EVE for a reference point, the distances would have been far too great for Star Citizen. So Star Citizen was the natural and fair choice here. Next, I needed a location that offered a distance large enough to provide a travel time measurement in all 3 games. If the distance was too short, the travel times might barely register in EVE or Elite. Therefore, the distance had to be far enough away. And the obvious destination for this was ArcCorp. This world sits roughly 42 million kilometers away from the departure point of Port Olisar. 42 million kilometers is a distance that can be fairly represented in both Elite Dangerous and EVE Online, as it translates to 141 light seconds or 0.282 astronomical units. So then, on with the test. To keep the travel times fair, default travel speeds were used, and this means that I didn't change any engine settings, and this was a way to ensure as little user input as possible. Now ships in Star Citizen have various speeds, so I used 2 ships in the video, the Hornet, which is well above bottom speeds, and the Starfarer, which has among the highest speeds. On a side note, I didn't count the downtime for the Hornet. At default settings on the engine, the quantum drive in the small ships will overheat and foul on the longer journeys, adding to the travel times. Due to the nature of this downtime and the fact that it was often bug-filled, I simply paused the timer and then resumed it again once the Hornet re-entered quantum travel. The Starfarer, meanwhile, had no such problem. There's no downtime during travel with this ship, as it can make the journey in one go. With Elite, things are a bit different. All ships in Elite have the same supercruise speed, and whilst different speeds, or different ships rather, have different maneuverability within supercruise, their acceleration, deceleration and velocities are the same throughout. And to ensure the same parameters of minimal user intervention, in Elite I use Supercruise Assist mode. EVE Online, meanwhile, is not shown in the video because I wanted to use a very specific distance, namely 0.282 astronomical units, which is the distance from Port Olisar to ArcCorp in Star Citizen. And to achieve this, I used the EVE Warp Time Calculator, which works by using equations for travel time provided by CCP, the developers of EVE. I also chose a random ship here, which certainly turned out to be rather on the slower side of all the ships available in EVE. In all cases, the counter for travel time began at the instant the travel mode was engaged, and stopped the instant of arrival. So how did all this work out? Well, here's the breakdown. In Star Citizen, it took the Hornet 15 minutes and 43 seconds to travel 42.3 million kilometers. This doesn't include the downtime to cool the quantum travel engine, which actually would have added to the travel time. The Starfarer, which is a far larger ship with a more powerful quantum travel engine, made the same journey in 7 minutes and 15 seconds. Keep in mind that these are with default engine settings. Now, the same distance of 42.3 million kilometers or 141 light seconds took just 1 minute and 52 seconds in Elite Dangerous, and this was using the default speeds provided by the Supercruise Assist. Meanwhile, in EVE Online, this theoretical journey of 42.3 million kilometers or 0.282 astronomical units took only 60 seconds. Now, to be extremely clear here, the point of this test wasn't to pick on any single game, but rather to compare the concept of travel times as a whole. 42 million kilometers is a massive distance by any standards, and in Star Citizen, whilst travelling this 42 million kilometers, the player is stuck in a travel tunnel for upwards of 1/3 of an hour. And whilst naturally on the larger ships the player can get up and walk around and therefore break up the monotony, on the slower, more smaller ships, this however is not an option. It's perhaps an obvious point then, but in my opinion at least, excessive travel times break gameplay. Elite and EVE allowed the players to cover this same distance in mere moments, and the gameplay does not suffer from doing so. Choose the correct locations in these two games, find an area that is densely populated enough, and travel time becomes insignificant. It's the same with Star Citizen. If you just go to the closer locations to Port Olisar, you'll get there very quickly. Time again is not a problem. And for all of this, space never feels small. And this is so for one very simple reason. It's space. And you really would have to go some significant distance or to significant breakage of gameplay to make space feel insignificant or very small. Now, all three of these games, Elite, Star Citizen and EVE, are both extremely problematic with travel times. Start looking at things in terms of thousands of light seconds or thousands of light years in Elite Dangerous, for example, and you'll get the same old problem. Travel times are dull. Now, no one ever sat and watched the full travel times of the USS Enterprise on its voyages from one star system to another. No one ever sat and watched the entire journey of the Millennium Falcon. And this is true for one extremely simple reason, because to do so would be boring. Space is big enough, varied enough, and interesting enough all on its own. It really doesn't need bloated travel times in any game. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.